Hello, I'm Mallory Ray with the University of Missouri Extension and the Missouri Agriculture, Food, and Forestry Innovation Center. In this video, Rachel Heinrichs, Grants Manager with the Missouri Department of Agriculture, will walk us through both application templates for Missouri's Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure, or RFSI, grant program, starting with the infrastructure application and then followed by the simplified equipment-only application. All potential applicants should carefully read through the full set of materials for these programs, including the guidance document, FAQ, scoring rubric, and more, which can be found at the Missouri Department of Agriculture's website. This will be a competitive program with limited funding available. If you have any questions about the grant, please contact Rachel at the Missouri Department of Agriculture. If you need any technical assistance as you consider applying for either part of this program, please reach out to the Missouri Ag, Food, and Forestry Innovation Center, or MAFIC. These services are available to anyone in the state of Missouri at no cost, and we're here to support potential applicants and expand economic opportunities in the middle of Missouri's food supply chain. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rachel.
Hello, Mallory. Rachel Heinrichs here again with the Missouri Department of Agriculture. Here to talk to you a little bit more today about the RFSI program. We want to remind you that this is a brand new program with USDA, and it is ultimately administered by the federal government. So we appreciate your patience with this program. And if you guys have, or the applicant has, a particular question or scenario within their project that they're unsure about, we want to encourage them to contact us and reach out to us, and we're more than happy to provide them guidance on a case-by-case basis.
So Rachel, do you want to bring up that application on our screen now?
So this is the infrastructure grant application template that you will fill out. And this is for infrastructure grants information. The basic applicant information is pretty basic. Please note that all applicants must have a UEI number. Again, if you don't know what a UEI number is, there is guidance resources on our website that will take you there. There's a link that you can click on that will help you register for a UEI number. The physical address, mailing address, again, you'll just need to provide that if they're different from the physical address, if your mailing is different from the physical. Primary point of contact. This is going to be the program or the project manager's point of contact, whoever is going to be in charge of the grant management on this side. Distressed Communities Index. You'll see this on the scoring rubric as well. It's again pretty straightforward. You will go to the link in this text, enter in your county information. It'll give you a distress score. You will plug that in below in the table below. And again, this is not just for the county that you live in, but this is the county that will be benefiting from your project. Type of applicant, pretty self-explanatory. Project title. This is just a few words about what your project is. It says 15 words or less. Duration of your project for infrastructure, it will be July 1 of 24 through December 31st of 2026. Project purpose. The next section is project purpose, and this is where you'll just kind of once you have an idea of your project, you'll pick which one most pertains to your project. Again, there is another option if you don't feel like either one of these options is best suited for your project. You can add another option if you so choose. Each project may include more than one topic.
And so just to reiterate, how a lot of people think about their business and their plans, and they've got a lot of questions about what's eligible. You have mentioned that these projects really focus on funding expansion in the middle of the supply chain. And when people look at that list, they're going to see a lot of examples of middle of the supply chain activities. But we are not talking about production space. So for example, if I'm an indoor vegetable grower, I cannot propose adding another cultivation room in addition to adding a commercial kitchen, say.
That is correct, Mallory. These projects are strictly focused on post-harvest. So after that harvesting phase, that aggregation, that processing, washing, packaging, labeling, storing, any of those processes, this is where that is focused, that middle of the supply chain. So your production and your harvesting will not be included in this. Okay, provide a list of objectives that this project hopes to achieve. So there's no really specific objective that for you to, I guess, choose from, but more from an applicant's point of view. What do you hope to achieve with this project, and how it pertains to the middle of the supply chain and the above project types?
How detailed should people try to get on the objectives? So, for example, if I wanted to propose building an on-farm space to extract and process bottle honey, could I simplify my project objectives to number one, construct building, number two, install equipment? Or would you like to see more details?
So you could do it, that you could simplify, that is an option. However, we would highly encourage you to give as much information and detail as you can. The better that the reviewers understand and can visualize your project and what it entails, the better off you will be when it comes to score on the scoring rubric, the better chance that you have of having that qualified application. So again, it can be simple, but we want to make sure at this point that your objectives are clearly detailed, identified, and that the reviewer can kind of envision what your project is trying to do.
So, for example, this is really focusing on projects that have broader impact. And if I'm one honey producer, but I'm planning on working with a collection of, say, 5 or 6 other honey producers, and I maybe forget to put that in my set of objectives, that could weaken my chances at this proposal if I'm not being really clear that I'm providing benefit beyond my own farm to the larger set of producers in the ag industry.
That is correct. So while it is not required that projects benefit multiple phases or multiple aspects of the industry, it does strengthen your application if you can include that in there, if you do intend to expand that capacity or expand your business capacity to be able to work with multiple producers or multiple retail avenues. That can only strengthen your application. So again, it's not required to benefit another producer or another entity, but it does strengthen your application. Okay, on to program your beneficiary. So this is, again, we talk about your match and we'll go into that here in a little bit, but specifically projects will be, and you'll see in the scoring rubric, there will be an emphasis on projects that do directly benefit underserved farmers and ranchers, new or beginning ranchers, veteran producers, or processors. So make sure that if your project does directly benefit any of those entities, make sure that you mark it on the application. If you have or are receiving any other support from federal or state grant programs, you need to make sure that you document here on at the bottom of page 4, so that way we're aware of what other support that you're receiving. One of the big things to keep in mind is that the expenditures, when it comes to your budget and planning your project, if that project is already being funded with other federal funding or state funded program, then we need to make sure that we either expand the project with RFSI funding, but they can't overlap. So again, just make sure that you note it here if you do have other support systems in place. External project support. So every applicant will be required to submit at least one, preferably more, letters of support from either community, other producers, consumers, customers, expressing their support for the project, expressing the need for the project. There is not an official letter or a template that you have to complete just on that company or that that entity's, business letterhead or on, in a Word document or whatever works, but just a couple of sentences about name, make sure they put their name, if they're with a certain organization, how they know the applicants, the applicant's business, and then how or why they feel like this is a needed project and what it would do to support them. Okay, performance measures are what we're calling outcome measures. There are two different outcome measures listed on the application. It says outcome number 2, which is capacity in the middle of the supply chain for local and regional food projects or products, and outcome number 3, which is increasing the economic viability. Applicants are required to have or select at least one outcome and one indicator. So under each one of those outcomes, there are a number of different indicators. While you do not have to meet or select every indicator, every applicant must select at least one.
Is that one in each category, or it can be one from one of the categories?
One from one of the categories. So if you feel like your project, you're putting in processing equipment, and that's, kind of the limit, maybe you're upgrading, doing little things, you may not have any kind of economic viability, or that you're not improving any existing facilities or putting in a new facility. Let's say you're not putting in any new facilities, that wouldn't pertain to you. But just one of those, either one of those, you'll just need at least one outcome indicator.
Sometimes it's hard for businesses or entities to kind of estimate what will happen from a project. So you mentioned before there's going to be some post-award reporting required of successful applicants, and that there will be a template available at some point. So is it your recommendation that applicants study this list carefully, be thoughtful about how they fill it out, but also know that they will be expected to report on the outcomes that they propose achieving?
That is correct, Mallory. So with this, depending on what outcomes and indicators you select on your application, those will be expected to be reported on your reporting measures, on your annual report, as well as your final report. So again, if you select just one measure, that limits your project and your reporting to one measure. However, like you said, Mallory, sometimes projects don't go as planned. So there again, it may be beneficial to think about maybe multiple potential reporting outcomes or performance measures that your project could touch. So then again, you have those to fall back on when you're reporting. All right, on to the budget. Matching funds, and this is something we touched a little bit on in our first video, but matching funds for infrastructure, again, infrastructure grant applications does require a matching fund. Equipment only does not. For the matching, it will either be a 50% or 25%. So depending on what qualification of the applicant will depend on the match level. So as you can see, it is self-certifying. There's nothing that you as the applicant has to go out and do in addition to, but you will need to make sure that you certify on one of those listed below. If those pertain to you, you will qualify for the 25% cash match. I do want to make a note here again, referencing back to that guidance document and our website. There are match calculators and examples in that guidance document. So if you're wondering what that match might look like for funding, whether it's a 50% or 25%, there are examples in our guidance document that can help guide you. Budget summary, it's pretty straightforward. Your funds requested, match value, and then it does select you, so you can select your match type, if it's cash or if it's in kind.
And then there's also a matching funds verification letter that applicants also have to fill out, yes. Correct?
Yes. So this is the match verification letter that will need to be completed with each match type, I say match type, but with each line of match. Each application will include like your total match and how it will align with your requested funding. On the match verification letter, it will need to be completed by each entity or organization that is providing match. And it will need to be signed and attached at the time of application. So it will go through the cash and the in-kind. And this is kind of a template letter that you can send to those entities that are helping you provide match support. And they can kind of fill in the gray shadowed areas, list out the in-kind or the cash or match contributions, and then they'll need to sign and date it.
Do you happen to know at this time if I see like employee names and salaries? What if an owner is not actually paying themselves from their business? You know, could I still count my time spent towards the project?
So yes, that can be counted as in-kind contribution. However, you need to make sure when documenting that the labor or the personnel time spent on the project is documented properly. So when you use that match, it's for the certain percentage or the appropriate amount of time that was actually spent on the project. So you'll have to submit like the name, title, hourly rate, and the percent of that time or number of hours spent working on that project and what duties they did pertaining to that project. And then as far as the items and activities, the fair market value, those items, I think you can kind of look up. What they suggest is looking up the cost of that item or that activity in your geographical area, and kind of looking at what they are asking for in your area. If for some reason something gets reported and it's flagged, we can always send that. If you don't know what to report, again, you're more than welcome to contact us and we can kind of help guide you the best that we can. But we could also reach out to USDA and ask them for their guidance as well. And if something seems a little different, we can help provide guidance on that as well. On to personnel. At this time, this is a section back on the infrastructure grant application. Personnel, as far as a direct cost on infrastructure grant, is allowable. However, it's on a case-by-case basis. So as an applicant, when you get to this point, if you're interested in claiming personnel as a direct cost towards this grant, we will provide some guidance on our website and on our guidance document as we get feedback from the federal government. But in the meantime, if that comes after this grant opens, then we encourage you to contact us. And again, we will work through that on a case-by-case basis. Travel will be minimal for infrastructure grants. If you're needing to travel to go to, for example, if you're wanting to send employees to HACCP training, which is Liz talked about in our grant guidance, that's that hazardous critical control point, that would qualify. So the travel to get that employee to that training would qualify under the infrastructure grant. Travel to pick up a piece of equipment, travel to go do that would be included in the infrastructure grant. However, travel to go to a conference or expo or marketing your product or anything like that, that would not be allowable under this grant. Of course, then you have your equipment section where you'll just list out your equipment that you plan to purchase. If it's infrastructure, is like your construction materials and your building. Your equipment is anything. So what USD defines, and it kind of talks about briefly up there in the application, is if it exceeds that $5,000 mark, it's considered what we call a equipment and not a supply. So depending on your project and what you're purchasing and what it entails, if you have equipment or items that you're purchasing that is individually over that 5,000 per unit, that will qualify as a piece of equipment. If it's under that 5,000, that will qualify as a supply. We do ask for justification on the application. You'll see that under personnel, under travel, supplies, equipment. And that's why we want to know why you need this item. Why do you need the item? How is it pertinent to the project, and what role does it play? And then you can list out your supplies. And again, it kind of gives you a brief that's at less than 5,000 per unit. And then you got a contractual or consultant. So again, this is a section that if you feel like there will be contractual or consultant work that is needed for your project outside of like that piece of equipment and that like installing that, you will need to spell that out here. Please know that it has to be pertinent to the project. This is something that, again, it's going to be a case-by-case basis of if it will be allowed or not, depending on the project and depending on the need of that contract or that consultant to do that work. Again, we would encourage you, if that is something that you foresee for your project, to reach out to us, and we will provide you more guidance on your specific scenario at that time. And other, this is a very broad category. This is anything that maybe that's not included in the other category. So if you have any rental expenses, leases, anything like that, that may potentially, like I said, again, that's not covered in, that's not a supply, that's not a piece of equipment, that's not a travel expense or a supply, then that would be listed here.
Some grant applications, when you submit it, if there are things that don't qualify, the entire application gets rejected. Other grants kind of say, well, we'll do these pieces, but we won't do those pieces. Do you know yet how applications will be judged for this particular program?
There are certain things that have to be. The application has to be complete. It has to be signed. There has to be your match. If it's on the infrastructure, there has to be match verification letters. There has to be, there is required documentation that has to be attached to that application. But as far as, if there's something, if they don't have let's say they don't have another category, they can put NA. If something is, they put something in here that we don't feel is allowable or something, we will work with the applicant with their project to be like, this part of your project falls within the scope and the funding priorities of our state, and we want you to focus on this, whereas this part may not. When thinking about your project, again, go back to that guidance document that's on our website and our webpage, because we do list out from earlier this year. Department of Ag did a survey period, a comment period, where we gathered comments from hundreds of people throughout the state. And through that, we were able to identify our funding priorities for the state of Missouri. And so focusing on those funding priorities and capturing key points from that for your project and how your project pertains to those funding priorities will only strengthen your application when the time comes from scoring. As you're working through the application or as you're reading the guidance document, make sure you're focusing on those funding priorities that Department of Ag has identified, and tie that into your project the best that you can. On to indirect costs. Infrastructure grants are allowed or eligible for indirect costs if your entity or business has what we call a NICRA, which is an indirect cost rate that is set just specifically for your entity. And forgive me if I forget what the NICRA symbol stands for, but you are allowed to use that NICRA indirect cost rate with this grant. You do have to attach that documentation or that NICRA to your grant application. If you do not, then you can elect to choose or charge what we call the de minimis rate of 10%. However, please make note that, and go back again to our scope and our requirements, our guidance document. But if you do the 10%, your equipment, for example, is not eligible to be calculated towards your indirect rate. So that de minimis 10% is what they're calling a modified total direct cost. And that takes your direct costs for your salaries, your wages, supplies, travel, and you can calculate 10% based on that. However, your rental costs, capital expenditures, and equipment are not eligible and don't fall within that 10% calculation. So again, we have resources on our website. Go back and utilize those. But if you have questions, feel free to contact us.
And it looks like here, Rachel, the indirect can be requested as direct funds to the applicant to cover kind of administrative cost. But the applicant could also choose to apply any indirect that they were eligible for as part of their match for the infrastructure.
That is correct. If they choose not to actually charge the indirect, that can be documented and used as part of your match.
You know, as a reminder, we want to remind everyone these grants are competitive. And as Rachel has said many times, if you have questions about anything specific to the grant, contact her and her team. They may not have the answer, but they will go back to USDA and get an answer in a timely way if possible. And again, Mathic can be a resource to any applicant that is seeking to apply to help you think through your entity, your business, your goals, how this grant can help you achieve those goals and really expand economic opportunity in the middle of our food supply chain here in Missouri.
Okay, equipment only grant. This grant application, this is the grant application for the equipment only. Again, it's the beginning part is the same as the infrastructure grant. Again, all entities or applicants do have to have that UEI number. So that does not change between applications. It does applicants, and we'll get into this later when we're talking about the equipment, but please note up here in the heading that applicants must attach documentation to substantiate the cost of each piece of equipment. And so when we get to the budget, not only do you have to list the piece of equipment and the amount, you've got to provide or attach documentation to support that amount that you put down. Again, same section, the Distressed Communities Index, same process as your infrastructure. You'll go out to that link there in the paragraph. You will complete that based on the county score. So let's get to page 3, and it's the project purpose. Here's where you'll kind of identify more of your project. Are you in the processing field, aggregating, distribution, or the value-added production? If you feel like it's something else, if it's, I feel like transportation and distribution go hand in hand. Your processing, labeling, packaging probably goes, more hand in hand. But again, if for some reason you feel like your project doesn't fall within one of those, you can add another. It asks you to list the agriculture food products that process with that piece of equipment. So depending on what equipment you're asking for, here's where you'll need to list the products or the agriculture food products that you intend to process with those pieces of equipment. It asks you for an impact that the equipment will have on your local and regional producers. Again, like we mentioned earlier, applicants or projects are not required to necessarily benefit more than one producer. However, it does strengthen the application when you can show how it does impact multiple producers or multiple avenues in that middle of the supply chain. Okay, directly benefit, again, this project, as we mentioned in the infrastructure, projects that directly benefit those underserved, new and beginning farmers, veteran producers, will be given an emphasis. Projects be given an emphasis that do directly benefit those. So make sure if your project does directly benefit either one of those avenues, please make sure and check mark that. Again, our expected performance measures. While we don't have as many as we do for the infrastructure, we still have 2 different outcome measures. Same thing, capacity in the middle of the supply chain and your economic viability. So again, make sure you don't have to select multiple ones or both outcomes, but either outcome, one or the other, and then at least one indicator under one of those outcomes. Your budget and your budget narrative, again, this is going to be pretty straightforward. This grant is an equipment only grant for a reason. It will cover the cost of the equipment and the cost of the installation of the equipment. If you have the piece of equipment and you're wanting to repair it or enhance it, that will fall under the infrastructure grant. So please know your project. And this is, again, is, why we want to emphasize before completing your application, make sure you read through the guidance documents and our FAQ document and our website to make sure that you're selecting the right project type, because entities can only apply for one. But in this instance, for the equipment only, it has to be to purchase that piece of equipment or certain pieces of equipment and for installation only. So again, if you have equipment that you're wanting to upgrade or you're wanting to refurbish, that will fall under the infrastructure grant application. As you know, there's no indirect or match with this grant, the equipment only grant, so there's not a section for that. We do want to encourage, again, for people to provide external support, letters of support, if you can, at least one, of how this project will support that middle of the supply chain, whether it's another entity, whether it's another producer, farmer, whether it's a need in the community. So we do ask that you include at least one letter of support from someone in the community or another business or producer. And again, it doesn't have to be a formal letter. There's no template for that. It can be something just real quick and simple that has name and address and kind of what this project means to them and how it supports a need in the community. And then also make sure that you attach your documentation for your equipment. But other than that, this equipment only is pretty simple and pretty straightforward.
Thanks, Rachel. And can you remind everyone about the funding minimums and maximums and the submission deadlines?
Yes. So before we get off, let's kind of go through that real quickly. Grant applications will open January 8th for both grant applications, both the infrastructure and the equipment only. The equipment only needs to be submitted electronically to grants@mda.mo.gov on Friday, March 8th by 3 p.m. Infrastructure only grant applications will be due electronically to MDA by Friday, March 15th at 3 p.m. For the infrastructure grants, there is a minimum application of $100,000 of federal funds requested, and a maximum amount of $3 million. And again, there's that 50% or 25% match that you will need to include into that budget for the infrastructure. On your equipment only, the minimum amount for your equipment only is $10,000. Your maximum is $100,000, and there is no match that requirement on your equipment only. And again, we want to encourage everybody that we know that this is a large program. We know that this is a brand new program, and it's a lot of information, even for us here at the Department of Ag. It's a lot of information for us to wrap our minds around. So if at any point that you guys have questions, concerns, or a scenario you want to walk through, please contact us here at the Department of Ag or the MAFIC team, and we can assist you with whatever you have questions on.